Welcome to the Growth Mindset Center, YouTube. Please take a moment of your precious time and generosity to click the subscribe button, comment. Thank you very much. Please listen to the next great content. What if the wisdom in 7 proven techniques to enhance your self-discipline could reshape how you approach every day? These aren't just ideas, they're strategic mindsets to elevate your life. Learn how 7 proven techniques to enhance your self-discipline connects clarity, action, and sustainable growth. You will not rise above the level of your discipline. You can have the best ideas, the strongest ambition, the clearest goals, but if you can't lead yourself consistently, you will fall short every single time. Discipline is the foundation of everything that lasts. It's not glamorous, it's not loud, but it's what separates the people who talk about potential from the ones who actually deliver on it. Most people underestimate the role discipline plays in building a meaningful life. They treat it like a side tool instead of a central pillar. They think they need motivation when what they really need is structure. They think they need to feel inspired when what they actually need is to stop negotiating with their own excuses. Discipline is the bridge between intention and execution. It's the trait that shows up long after the mood has left. It's what drives consistency. It's what builds character. It's what creates trust with yourself. Because when you become someone who does what they say, your self-respect grows, your confidence grows, your influence grows. This isn't about punishment. Discipline is not about being rigid or robotic. It's about being clear. It's about being aligned. It's about building habits that support who you're becoming, not who you've been. Discipline isn't about making life harder. It's about removing chaos, about reducing unnecessary decisions, about building rhythm so you can create momentum. The truth is, most people don't lack potential. They lack follow-through. They're good at starting, bad at finishing, good at getting inspired, bad at staying locked in. Not because they don't care, but because they've never trained their discipline. They've never structured their life to support it. They've never replaced their patterns. You can't expect to reach your goals with the same behavior that's kept you stuck. You can't expect to break through while still defaulting to the same habits that sabotage your momentum. Change requires more than effort. It requires discipline daily, quietly, repeatedly. Discipline is the skill that unlocks every other one. It makes learning easier because you stay consistent. It makes progress faster because you reduce friction. It makes performance sustainable because you're not relying on how you feel. You're moving from what you've decided. The challenge is discipline rarely feels good in the moment. It often feels inconvenient, boring, repetitive. But over time, it delivers something motivation never can: real, lasting results. And the more you train it, the more normal it becomes. Until one day, the things that used to require effort become part of your identity. There are 7 core techniques that sharpen this trait. Not fluff, not theory. Proven ways to build real discipline that holds under pressure, that doesn't collapse under distraction, that becomes a system you can trust, not a feeling you have to chase. These techniques are not for people who want it easy. They're for people who are ready to stop starting over, who are tired of hoping and ready to lead, who are done making promises they don't keep. This isn't about turning into someone else. It's about becoming who you said you were. It's about removing the gaps between your intention and your behavior. It's about replacing emotional decisions with aligned ones. It's about building a life where discipline doesn't feel like effort. It feels like integrity. The first technique to enhance your self-discipline is to eliminate negotiation. That internal debate, the voice that asks if you really have to do it today, the reasoning that tells you it's okay to push something until tomorrow, the logic that justifies easing up just this once has to be silenced. Because the moment you begin to negotiate with discipline, you lose to your feelings. And feelings are unreliable. You cannot win long-term if every action requires a conversation. If every decision depends on how you feel in the moment, then the moment controls you, not your plan, not your vision, your mood. And moods lie. They shift. They change based on sleep, stress, weather, other people's words, your own doubt. If your behavior is dictated by something that unpredictable, then your results will be just as unstable. Discipline begins when negotiation ends. When there's no question, no debate, no maybe. It's scheduled, so it's done. It's part of the process, so it's non-negotiable. You stop needing to feel inspired and start committing to the standard. You don't ask whether or not you're going to show up. You just show up. The key here is pre-decision. Most people try to make decisions in the moment, but by the time the moment arrives, you're tired, you're distracted, you're emotional, you're not clear. And when you're not clear, you negotiate. That's why your standards need to be set in advance. Your rules, your routines, your commitments, they're already decided. And when they're decided, your mind doesn't have to waste energy figuring it out all over again. You do it because it's who you are now. Not because it's easy, not because you feel like it, but because it's the rule, the system, the identity. That's how real discipline is built. Through alignment, not adrenaline. Through principle, not preference. Through non-negotiable habits that become part of your operating system. The best athletes in the world don't train when they feel like it. They train because that's what the schedule demands. The best leaders don't make decisions based on whether they feel powerful. They follow their process. The best creators don't rely on motivation. They rely on their system, and that's what separates them. Not talent, not excitement, structure, discipline, repetition. So, how do you eliminate negotiation? You build routines. You anchor behaviors to time, to triggers, to identity. You don't just say you're going to be more disciplined. You decide exactly what that looks like. What time, what day, what action. You make it specific, and once it's on the calendar, it's as good as done. You don't leave open space for maybe. You remove the word later from your vocabulary. You get honest about what's actually essential. You cut the options that waste your time. You simplify and you remove friction from starting, because the easier it is to begin, the less room there is to talk yourself out of it. Every time you override the negotiation, your identity shifts. You show yourself who's in charge. You prove that your vision matters more than your mood, that your purpose isn't subject to your feelings, that your standard isn't up for discussion, and that internal power begins to build. Eventually, you'll notice something new. The voice that used to say, "Skip it," gets quieter. The resistance gets weaker because your pattern has changed. You're not hesitating. You're acting. You're not stalling. You're executing. And with each repetition, the negotiation fades and discipline takes its place. This isn't about forcing yourself forever. It's about retraining the voice in your head to support your future instead of sabotaging it. It's about shifting the internal conversation from "can I get out of this?" to "this is who I am from. How do I feel?" to "what did I say I do?" That's a different level of leadership, because when you eliminate negotiation, you create momentum. You move faster, you build confidence. Not because it's easy, but because it's automatic. It's in your calendar. It's in your code. You don't wait for the right moment. You create rhythm, you create flow. You remove the drag of indecision, and you gain clarity, energy, and progress. The second technique to enhance your self-discipline is to master micro-commitments. Most people overestimate what they can do in a week and underestimate what they can do in a year. But the secret to unlocking that year is hidden in the day, in the next hour, in the next 5 minutes, in the next decision. Discipline is not built in big declarations. It's built in small follow-through. Micro-commitments are specific, time-bound, doable actions that anchor your focus and reinforce your identity. They are the daily proof that you are becoming who you said you were. When people fail to stay disciplined, it's usually not because they aimed too low. It's because they aimed too vague. I'll start working out. I'll eat better. I'll be more focused. None of those statements have teeth. They have no time, no trigger, no target, and without that, you can't measure them. But when you say, I'm going to write for 25 minutes after I finish my first cup of coffee, that's a micro-commitment. I'm going to do 50 push-ups before I get in the shower. That's a micro-commitment. It's not about willpower. It's about setting up the next small win so that your brain begins to expect discipline. The magic of micro-commitments is that they train your self-respect. Every time you follow through, you're not just completing a task, you're casting a vote for the person you're becoming. That vote compounds. And when you string enough micro-commitments together, you start to build a track record. And that track record becomes confidence. Confidence is not a feeling. It's a pattern. It's the recognition that you can trust yourself to do what you said you'd do. And you don't need huge wins to build it. You need consistency. You need rhythm. You need proof. Micro-commitments give you that proof. They are the brick-by-brick foundation of your identity. When life gets overwhelming, the mistake most people make is trying to fix everything at once. They go all in on a 30-day plan, change their diet, overhaul their routine, and within a week they're exhausted because they didn't build endurance. They tried to sprint through transformation. But discipline isn't built that way. It's built through consistency, through simplicity, through wins. You can stack every day. And when you master the art of small wins, you become someone who doesn't need hype to act. You become someone who finishes what they start. Not because it's exciting, but because it's what you do. You get addicted to completion, to momentum, to discipline that's sustainable. Micro-commitments create data. They give you something to track because you can't improve what you don't measure. And when your discipline feels off, you can go back to the basics. What were you doing when you felt strongest? What small actions had you locked in? What shifted? What needs to come back? That's how you lead yourself with pattern awareness, with personal accountability. You don't need to overhaul your life. You need to show up for the next 5 minutes, then the next, then the next. One small promise, one small action, one small win. That's how discipline becomes a part of you. Not because you changed everything, but because you stopped abandoning the little things that mattered. You start your day with clarity. What is the one thing I will finish today, no matter what? What's the trigger? What's the time frame? What's the first step? That's it. Then you build the day around it. Not hoping to feel ready, not waiting for motivation, just acting from your decision. The people who stay disciplined aren't more disciplined than you. They're better at setting up their day to support it. They use small commitments as anchors. They create structure where most people create stress. They start simple, build consistently, and never stop. That's what mastery looks like. The third technique to enhance your self-discipline is to master the art of recovery. Most people associate discipline with intensity, pushing harder, grinding longer, powering through. But lasting discipline isn't just about the effort you exert. It's about the energy you manage. And if you don't know how to recover, you'll burn out. Not because you weren't capable, but because you never learned how to sustain. Discipline requires energy. Focus requires energy. Resilience requires energy. And when you deplete that energy without replenishing it, you start to slip. You stop thinking clearly. You make poor decisions. You procrastinate. Not because you're lazy, but because you're drained. Your willpower fades. Your frustration grows, and your results stall. This is where recovery becomes strategic, not passive, not lazy, strategic. Recovery is not what you do when you're too tired to keep going. Recovery is what you build into your life, so you can keep going. It's proactive, it's planned, it's prioritized. And the people who win long-term don't wait to recover until they collapse. They recover so they don't collapse. Most people treat recovery as a reward, something you get after you've pushed too far. But the disciplined see it differently. They know that rest is not an escape from the mission. It's fuel for it. They understand that true recovery increases their output, sharpens their clarity, and allows them to lead from overflow instead of survival. So, how do you apply this? First, you build rhythms, not just routines. Rhythms mean you understand the natural cycles of performance. You don't try to be on all the time. You push when it's time to push, and you unplug when it's time to rest. You create space for recovery, not as a reaction to burnout, but as a consistent part of your life. You set boundaries around your time, around your inputs, around your energy. You stop saying yes to everything just to be polite. You protect your morning. You protect your night. You protect the spaces in between where your mind needs silence. Because clarity doesn't come in chaos. It comes in stillness. You schedule recovery the same way you schedule effort. You don't leave it to chance. You build it in movement, rest, nutrition, stillness, reflection, boundaries, silence. You create habits that allow your nervous system to reset, so that your actions are not just force, but precision. The more responsibility you carry, the more recovery you need, not because you're weak, but because you're building something strong. Because the weight of leadership, of growth, of discipline, it compounds. And if you don't manage that weight, it starts managing you. Recovery means emotional recovery. It means creating space to process your thoughts, your fears, your pressure, not pretending you're fine, not suppressing, but facing what you're carrying so it doesn't leak into your behavior. So it doesn't sabotage your clarity, so it doesn't distort your decisions. You give yourself space to reset. Not because you want to slow down, but because you want to speed up. You want to make better decisions. You want to think more clearly. You want to operate from alignment, not exhaustion. And that alignment doesn't come from doing more. It comes from recovering better. Recovery is what keeps your discipline from turning into burnout. It's what keeps your ambition from turning into anxiety. It's what keeps your focus from collapsing into fatigue. You don't build endurance by pushing nonstop. You build endurance by learning how to recharge. The people who sustain their discipline are not superhuman. They just treat energy like a currency. They spend it wisely. They replenish it consistently. They don't just plan their workload, they plan their recovery. They lead themselves through seasons of stress with structure. You are not weak for needing recovery. You are wise for choosing it, because the goal is not just to win today, it's to keep winning, to keep leading, to keep rising, and that requires rest. Not as escape, but as strategy. Not when it's convenient, but because it's essential. The fourth technique to enhance your self-discipline is to raise the cost of inconsistency. Most people stay inconsistent because inconsistency doesn't feel like it costs them anything in the moment. Skip one workout doesn't seem like a big deal. Snooze the alarm once, no real damage. Break the promise. Just this time you'll try again tomorrow. And because nothing explodes immediately, the pattern continues. But it's not free. Every time you break your word to yourself, you lose trust. You chip away at your belief. You tell your subconscious that your goals are optional, that your standards are flexible, that your identity is negotiable, and that erosion isn't loud, but it is powerful. Because discipline isn't just about performance. It's about the story you believe about yourself. If your story is, I do what I say, you show up different. If your story is, I break promises, your behavior starts to reflect that. And that story is shaped not by what you say, but by what you reinforce. Repetition builds identity, and inconsistency builds the wrong one. So if you want to change the pattern, you have to make inconsistency expensive. You have to feel the weight of breaking your word. You have to create enough internal pressure that skipping the behavior hurts more than doing it. That sounds harsh, but it's effective because discipline is easier when the alternative feels unacceptable. You do this in two ways. First, through consequences. You set real, meaningful penalties for not following through, not to punish yourself, but to condition your behavior. Miss your workout. Donate to a cause you strongly oppose. Don't finish your writing session. Call someone you respect and tell them. Skip your planning time. Hand over something uncomfortable. Money, privilege, comfort. The goal isn't shame, it's accountability. It's making inconsistency visible, tangible, felt. Because what gets measured gets managed. And if inconsistency is invisible, it will never be corrected. You have to feel it, see it, name it, then you correct it. Second, through reflection, if you miss a standard, you document it. You don't pretend it didn't happen. You write it down. You ask yourself, what was the trigger? What was the excuse? What decision led to it? You track your patterns so they stop owning you because you can't fix what you don't face. This practice of making inconsistency visible rewires your brain. It shifts your relationship with discipline because now your behavior is tied to identity, not just outcome. You stop saying, I'll try, and start saying, I don't miss. You stop making excuses and start making adjustments. This means you set minimums because discipline isn't about doing it perfectly. It's about doing something every day. No matter what, you decide what the floor is. Even on your worst day, you hit that floor. That baseline, that minimum effort that keeps the muscle alive, that's how discipline becomes unbreakable. Your consistency doesn't have to look dramatic. It doesn't have to impress anyone. It just has to be reinforced. Repetition creates permanence, and permanence creates peace. Because now you don't waste energy trying to get back on track. You never left the track. Even when it was hard, even when you were tired, you showed up. That's what matters. When inconsistency is expensive, discipline becomes easier. Not because it's fun, but because the alternative feels heavier. You've trained your nervous system to reject drift, to feel out of place when your standard slips, to catch the slide before it becomes a spiral. That's power. That's awareness. That's leadership. The fifth technique to enhance your self-discipline is to anchor your habits to identity. Behavior driven by willpower fades. Behavior driven by identity lasts. Because when something becomes who you are, not just what you do, it gets reinforced by your decisions, your language, your environment, and your expectations. Discipline becomes sustainable when it's no longer about force, but alignment. Most people try to change their habits without changing how they see themselves. They say, I want to be consistent, but they still identify as someone who struggles to follow through. They say, I'm going to get in shape, but they still carry the mindset of someone who only trains when they're motivated. That's why change doesn't last, because their actions are outpacing their identity. You can push yourself with effort, but effort without alignment drains you. It turns discipline into a fight. But when you begin to shift how you see yourself, when you start saying, this is who I am now, the behavior that felt forced starts to feel natural. It becomes the default, not the exception. You do this by making your standards part of your identity language. You stop saying, I need to work out, and start saying, I'm someone who doesn't miss workouts. You stop saying, I'm trying to be focused, and start saying, I'm someone who protects their time. You shift the frame from what I hope to do to how I already live. This doesn't mean you lie to yourself. It means you practice becoming. You act from the future. You embody the version of you who already lives that way. And you back it with action, even if it's small, even if it's uncomfortable. Because each action you take in alignment with that identity strengthens it. Identity is not fixed. It's built. It's trained. It's formed through repetition, through consistent evidence, through small wins that stack up and eventually become truth. You don't need to believe it fully to begin. You just need to choose it and behave accordingly. Start with one area. Pick a habit you want to build and ask, who is the version of me that lives like this every day? Describe that person in detail. How do they think? How do they act when it's inconvenient? What decisions do they make when no one's watching? Then you become that person before the results show up. Because the fastest way to change your life is to stop making decisions based on your current identity and start making them based on your future one. The version of you who already has discipline doesn't ask, should I do this today? They've already decided. The standard is non-negotiable. Anchoring your habits to identity means you create an environment that reflects it. If you see yourself as someone who writes daily, your space reflects that. If you see yourself as someone who respects their health, your fridge reflects that. If you see yourself as someone who owns their focus, your schedule reflects that. Environment is an extension of identity, and alignment between the two is what makes behavior automatic. You don't rise to the level of your ambition, you fall to the level of your identity. If your current self-concept still sees discipline as a chore, it will always feel like effort. But when your concept of self becomes clear, aligned, elevated, your actions follow. Not because you're trying, because you've trained. And here's the beauty. The more you live like the version of you you're becoming, the faster you become them. Each day you hold the standard. Each day you show up aligned. Each day you reinforce the behavior. You stop needing to force the behavior. It becomes part of your nature, part of your rhythm, part of your identity. The sixth technique to enhance your self-discipline is to develop pattern recognition. You can't out-discipline a pattern you don't understand. If you don't know what breaks your focus, what drains your energy, what triggers your procrastination, then you'll keep trying to fix your life through willpower while repeating the same cycles over and over again. Discipline that lasts is never just about forcing behavior. It's about studying behavior. Every action you take is part of a pattern. Every excuse you make has a rhythm. Every time you say you'll start tomorrow, every time you convince yourself it's okay to skip just this once, every time you fall back into old habits, that didn't happen randomly. That happened because you were following a script, a pattern that you've likely repeated for years. Most people don't lack effort. They lack awareness. They try harder without noticing where their energy leaks. They set higher goals without understanding their own resistance. And then they get discouraged when they burn out or fall short. Not because they didn't care, but because they were trying to perform without diagnosing the problem. Pattern recognition changes that. It turns discipline into precision. You start asking better questions. When do I usually drift? What situations cause me to quit? What time of day does my energy collapse? What conversations drain me? What foods make me tired? What thoughts show up right before I break my word? Those answers aren't random. They're maps. And once you can map your pattern, you can disrupt it. You stop reacting and start responding. You stop walking blindly into self-sabotage and start setting traps for your own excuses. You build in safeguards. You redesign the pattern before it repeats. That's not discipline through intensity. It's discipline through awareness. This is why journaling, reflection, and tracking your behavior matter. Not because it's trendy, but because you can't improve what you don't observe. If you're not noticing your tendencies, you're a slave to them. But when you become the kind of person who pays attention, you gain leverage, and leverage is what creates lasting change. You learn to recognize the early signs of drift. Drift doesn't start when you miss the workout. It starts when you start bargaining with yourself the night before. It doesn't start when you break your diet. It starts when you stop planning your meals. It doesn't start when you cancel your commitments. It starts when you stop checking your calendar. Discipline isn't just about how you act. It's about how early you catch the slide, how quickly you notice your own resistance, how honestly you audit your choices. The people who stay locked in aren't stronger. They're just faster at recognizing when they're slipping. They course correct in minutes, not months. You can train this. You can build the habit of checking in. You stop waiting for a breakdown to pay attention. You set review points, end-of-day check-ins, weekly audits. You ask, what did I do well today? What needs refinement? Where did I drift? What triggered it? What was I avoiding? That reflection builds self-leadership. And when you repeat that process consistently, you start to anticipate your own sabotage before it starts. You recognize the loop, you see the resistance, and instead of waiting to fail, you adjust. You predecide how you'll respond. You make a plan for the next time that same pattern tries to pull you off track. This is how you stop repeating the same year 10 times and calling it growth. You stop operating on default and start leading your behavior. You stop fighting fires and start preventing them. That's real discipline, not the kind you show off, the kind you live. The seventh technique to enhance your self-discipline is to shorten the gap between intention and action. The longer you wait to move, the louder resistance gets. The more you think about it, the more reasons your brain will give you to delay it. That hesitation becomes a habit. And over time, your life starts to reflect that gap, not your goals. Discipline is a response pattern. Not just doing the hard thing, but doing it fast. Doing it without ceremony, without fanfare, without needing the stars to align. Because every second you spend thinking about whether or not to act is another second you train yourself to hesitate. And hesitation becomes doubt. Doubt becomes avoidance. Avoidance becomes regret. The disciplined don't wait until they feel ready. They don't wait until they have clarity on every detail. They don't need to feel like it. They've trained themselves to move as soon as the intention appears. The alarm rings, they get up. The idea shows up. They write it down. The task appears. They start it. No delay, no drama, just execution. This kind of responsiveness can be trained. It's a muscle. You start by noticing your lag time from decision to action. How long do you wait? What excuse do you make? What friction shows up? Then you start reducing it. First by minutes, then seconds. Then it becomes instinct. The thought appears, and you're already moving. You can call it a 5-second window, a two-conned rule. Doesn't matter what you name it. What matters is this. If you don't act on the decision immediately, your mind will start looking for the exit. You'll start thinking about how hard it is, how tired you are, how it could wait, and by the time you finish that conversation, you've already lost. The people who win are not the ones who think the most. They're the ones who decide and move. They keep the gap between idea and action so small that doubt has no time to plant its roots. That's not recklessness. That's rhythm. It's pace. It's trusting your instinct, trusting your preparation, trusting your process. The moment you know what to do, start. Don't stall. Don't plan it to death. Don't stack it behind 10 other tasks that don't matter. Start. Even if it's small, even if it's messy, even if you don't feel ready, start. That shift in tempo will change your life. When you live this way, you build integrity with yourself. You train your brain to expect follow-through. You stop giving energy to hesitation and start pouring energy into motion. And motion creates momentum. Momentum creates belief, and belief reinforces behavior. You become someone who trusts themselves to act, and when you trust yourself to act, discipline becomes simple. Not always easy, but clear. You're not spending half your day in your head. You're not wrestling with procrastination. You're not constantly trying to generate courage. You've decided, and you're moving. This is why so many people feel stuck. Not because they're incapable, but because they've built a habit of overthinking. They've made a routine out of resistance, and they think the solution is more planning, more research, more motivation. But the real solution is more movement. When the time comes to act, don't wait. Don't drift. Don't distract yourself. Start. Build that responsiveness like a reflex, like a discipline. Because that fast action, that lean into behavior, is what breaks the loop. That's what creates results. You now hold 7 techniques, 7 tools, 7 strategies that don't just talk about discipline, but build it. And they work. Not because they're flashy, not because they're new, but because they're rooted in truth, in behavior, in clarity, in repetition. They're not tricks. They're not hacks. They're foundations. And when you live them, not just study them, you become someone who leads themselves with intention instead of emotion. You've learned that discipline begins where negotiation ends. That every time you argue with your standard, you weaken your identity. But when you predecide what matters, when you stop looking for the mood to match your mission, everything gets simpler, your day gets lighter, your direction gets clearer. You don't hesitate, you move. You've learned the power of micro-commitments, that small promises kept daily do more to change your future than giant leaps fueled by short-lived hype. You don't need a massive plan. You need movement, a pattern, a track record that reminds you, this is who I am now. That proof stacks. That proof leads. You've understood recovery is not weakness. It's strategy. That burnout doesn't come from effort alone, but from unmanaged energy. You've seen that the most disciplined people aren't always the ones who push hardest. They're the ones who protect their rhythm, who rest with intention, who build recovery into their routine so their performance can last. You've learned that inconsistency can't be tolerated. That if it doesn't cost you, you won't change it. That follow-through becomes real when the alternative feels unacceptable. You don't want to be perfect. But you can't afford to keep pretending inconsistency is harmless, because every broken promise to yourself tells your brain that the standard doesn't matter. You've anchored discipline to identity. You've stopped trying to act like a disciplined person and started becoming one. Every action has become a vote. Every repetition has become evidence. And when your identity and your behavior align, discipline becomes your nature. You stop needing to push. You start moving in rhythm. You've studied your patterns. You've stopped blaming your circumstances. You've started owning your reactions. You've paid attention to what breaks your focus, what triggers your drift, what steals your time. And instead of reacting, you've built response. You've shortened the distance between who you want to be and how you show up. And you've closed the gap between intention and action. You've stopped waiting to feel ready. You've stopped treating hesitation like a habit. You've stopped giving your momentum away to doubt. You move now. You act now. You build now. You lead now. And that fast action is what creates compound change. Discipline isn't something you find. It's something you build. And you've been building it brick by brick, decision by decision, day by day. You've stopped chasing the ideal version of yourself and started living as them. Not perfectly, but consistently. And that consistency, that's where the shift happens. This isn't the end of the work. This is the structure you return to, the mirror you check when you drift, the map you follow when the pressure hits. You're not going to get it right every time. But now you have the tools. You know what to do when the resistance shows up. You know how to move through it. So lead yourself. Live the standard. Keep the promise. And every day that you do, discipline gets easier. Not because it's less demanding, but because you've stopped making it optional. This insight empowers practical change without overwhelming complexity. Thank you for listening and subscribe, comment on the channel.